Welcome to Warehouse Automation Matters. I'm your host, Mary Hart, and I'm here with Erik Pichette, Senior Manager of Optimization and Solution Design here at Locus Robotics, and Adam Schwarz, Manager of Optimization and Solution Design here at Locus Robotics, to discuss how to optimize and design warehouse mezzanines for automation. Erik and Adam, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it. Let's get right into it. Can you each tell us a bit about your role here at Locus and how you got involved in this industry?
Sure. Good morning, Mary. Thanks for having us. I'm on the optimization and solutions design team, which falls under our customer success umbrella. Getting into this industry really started right out of school. So I've been in the industry. I took a role in manufacturing, working as a warehouse manager, and then moved over into a solutions design role for a large retailer, and then moved into this role.
Yeah, similar to Erik, right? He nailed what we do within the Locus organization, but just my background. I started right out of school. I started at a large medical device manufacturer. I was in continuous improvement in a warehousing environment. I worked on designing warehouses, and then I was exposed to some automation. And then when I went exploring, I found Locus, and it's been a match made in heaven.
So let's talk about warehouse mezzanines. What are warehouse mezzanines and why are they becoming such a critical focus in warehouse automation?
It's an excellent question. A warehouse mezzanine, it's as simple as it's an elevated platform which is installed to expand your current pick space.
And with space at a premium nowadays, and as your business grows and your customer base grows, instead of going east to west in your existing space, you really want to leverage that north to south space to ensure that you're using it as efficient as possible.
So you've both worked on optimizing mezzanines for a leading home improvement retail company. Could you walk us through that project? What were the key challenges and how did you overcome them?
This project, it was a very rewarding one as it presented some key challenges that Erik will review here in just a moment. And also want to mention that partnering with that company has been a great experience. Essentially, the key portion is creating two site designs while keeping in mind it is one entire operation.
Yeah, and some of those challenges that you want to consider is, from an efficiency standpoint, how much volume are you going to be putting through per floor dependent on the design of the mezzanine itself. Another consideration you need to look into is the amount of labor per floor that you plan to use and how to spread that effectively based on that volume per floor. Some of the items that we worked on and overcame was maybe some integration with the customer's WMS system, where we integrated and developed a pick and pass feature that allowed us to pick orders on one floor and pass them to another, that we've rolled out amongst our customer base that do pick within mezzanines. A lot of conversations that we had with the customer was directly with their ops teams, those folks on the front line, educating them on what those operational best practices should be by floor and how to, I mentioned before, how do you move volume and labor per floor, specifically slotting, right? How do you slot your higher items closer to the end destination, whether that is on your first floor or ground floor or your top floor? In this scenario, since a lot of mezzanines are supported by fixed structures and sometimes supported by racks themselves, we need to understand where those unique parking positions for the bots are and how the bots will navigate and flow through the space effectively to ensure that you're picking the desired volume for that day.
Great. Let's continue that conversation. What are the unique considerations, if any, when you're designing mezzanines for industries such as healthcare versus e-commerce?
Yeah, so there are many considerations that you want to look at. You definitely want to consider existing structures where those are. Buildings have those existing building columns. Not that you can manipulate building columns, but as you design a mezzanine, how do you ensure that the racking are in the right space? How wide the racking is, because you want to consider for optimal travel paths for your picking associates, whether they're using a autonomous solution like Locus, or if they're still picking manually with carts, You want to be sure that the aisle widths are wide enough or small enough to ensure efficient travel. Also want to consider product mix in your order profile. Where those items, maybe the larger items, where are they slotted that is efficient for both the inbound and the outbound process? And then those higher volume items, whether they're small or large, you want to consider the same thing.
Stuff that isn't necessarily unique to a mezzanine, but is very familiar to anybody working within a warehouse, are conveyance systems and the flow of them. In particular, we can get really creative in mezzanine spaces. Can we reverse the flow of conveyor to allow for a tote or a carton replenishment? How does that delivery from floor 1 to floor 2, floor 3 to floor 1, things of that nature, how do we design for that in the conveyances within the mezzanines? And lastly, of course, just like with any installation within automation of AMRs, we need to design for bot charging. Typically in a warehouse environment, it's a little bit trickier, but we can find a lot of different spaces and they need to be high visibility. And we need to ensure, of course, that we have power and electrical in that space.
So, what are the top 3 best practices you recommend when you're automating your warehouse mezzanines?
To start, I would say, how do you leverage your space to perform multiple tasks, and consider that. Those tasks would be anywhere from the inbound process. How do you understand where the items and SKUs are coming from? How are they put away? And then the start point or the induction point for maybe an AMR process or a manual process, and then where those pick paths are ending, where are those drop-off points. Some other areas are somewhere where exceptions would happen, or hospital, where you have shorted orders that need to be acted on. I mentioned this already, but it's definitely critical to understand where you slot your high movers. We want to ensure that they are in those advantageous locations, whether they're wider aisles, whether it's pallet locations, also considering maybe some bin racking and where those exactly are in the pick space.
Lastly, a really good best practice that sometimes is easily forgotten is clearly defining the space with some fast, whether it's floor tape, whether it's something along the wall to illustrate where certain items are stored. This is another very easy but a critical best practice that we always recommend.
And how do you ensure that the design of a mezzanine optimally utilizes the available space while also accommodating future growth?
From our point of view, collaboration with the team here at Locus is the best way to help influence the design ahead of finalizing it. If we're able to have some influence on where certain areas are, how we're going to design things, what the space is going to look like, it's just going to lead to a much more optimal operation given the space that's available. Additionally, similar to what Erik just mentioned, we always have to be mindful of where those fast moving SKUs are within, and are those aisles that they're stored? Are they optimally designed to handle those volume demands? Are they near an induct drop off point? Are we going to be able to allow for multiple pick positions at that bay? And of course, is replenishment going to be easily accomplished within that space, given those SKUs are going to be those heavy hitters?
Some of those conversations we have with our customers and within the industry we don't want to go back and have to suggest laying things out differently. So designing for those put away tasks and designing for those pack out tasks are critical in a mezzanine environment, because we want to ensure that those high volume SKUs are in maybe a wider aisle to allow for more traffic and less congestion.
In your experience with mezzanines and designing them and optimizing them, what are the most common mistakes companies make when they're automating mezzanines, and how can they avoid them?
I would say one of the biggest ones is ensuring that you involve all your stakeholders in the initial design. Whether that's a conveyor vendor or an AMR vendor or any other vendors that you're working with. As once a mezzanine is developed and bolts are in the ground, it's a pretty fixed structure, and it costs a lot to make changes. So we really want to ensure that the design is right ahead of time, so that it reduces the time and money that's spent maybe going back and fixing some of the things when it comes to conveyor and automation. You also want to account for the volume fluctuated by floor, dependent on how many levels you're able to get into a mezzanine, and dependent on where your pack out stations are. You want to ensure that the the volume per floor is taken into account, whether that's by SKU, whether that's by customer, whether that's by location of the pack out within the building and location of the conveyance design.
And then, of course, something that's a relatively common mistake is only keeping in mind the pick space. We also have to be very mindful, and part of our design process is ensuring how are the empty totes, the empty cartons, how are they being built? What's that process to get it onto the AMR and into the pick space? And then downstream, that also has impacts to the entire operation. What's that pack out process look like? Is there a put wall that is potentially going to be a choke point? That's always something that we need to consider within any sort of automated system, is not just the pick space, but the operations leading in and out of the pick space.
And how has technology evolved in the last few years to support the automation of mezzanines? Are there any particular innovations that have made a significant impact that you've seen?
From mine and Eric's perspective, it's a little bit difficult to speak to other automation solutions, but from a Locus perspective, we're constantly enhancing our WM integration capabilities. This is to help, of course, complete orders across multiple floors. We've also improved our ease of use to change a robot's profile by a specific floor. If floor 2 has specific products that are going to be having a sale, we make it very, very easy for operations to switch robots between floors.
You'll also see advancements in how cartons or totes are created to ensure that the size of those cartons are the most efficient size. So we've integrated it with some vendors on how to ensure that we're utilizing the best cube available in the cartons. And then on the same note, as cartons and totes travel between floors, how do you look at unique solutions to move those up and down, north and south? There are some unique space-saving solutions where you can call it, instead of a spiral conveyor or a standard conveyor, there are tote and carton elevators that take up a fraction of space of a conveyor that we may all know.
And how do you see AI and machine learning influencing the future of mezzanine automation?
Yeah, it's exciting to see AI and machine learning at the forefront of the industry that we're in. One thing that I see it being used for critically in the future is how do we use it to autonomously slot and make slotting decisions? How are those dynamic slotting decisions made on floor 1 versus floor 2, floor 3, and floor 4? How do we use that same methodology as we address not just seasonality of the year, but volatility within the week of maybe some SKUs, dependent on if it's a healthcare or an e-com customer?
Just like Eric's talking about, where we're identifying the slotting decisions to be made, we also see some opportunities where we could help identify the labor needed by a mezzanine floor. And with AI and any sort of machine learning, it can understand your operation, and we can get as granular as by hour, by day, by week, whatever that the operation and the operational leads require at that time.
So, how can companies measure the ROI of automating their mezzanines? And what are some realistic expectations that they should have?
So one thing that you'll see right out of the gate is your improved labor productivity and how your labor is utilized across your mezzanine. And this is done through a lot of detailed analytics and detailed analytical visuals that the ops teams can refer to as we get more data ahead of us. We were talking about AI and machine learning, right? Coming down the line, how do we get that predictive analytics to ensure that we're using the right amount of labor, and while we're using it, making sure that we're utilizing it correctly? One thing that you'll also see is meeting and exceeding your SLA expectations. Nowadays, a lot of customers, we really rely on those SLAs, especially as we get into the holiday times. You see everyone advertising 1 day, 2 day shipping, next day shipping. So the ability to meet those SLA expectations is in real life right now.
Relates to some realistic expectations. It is that not all mezzanine floors will have similar output. Ideally, right, we want to design that the floor closest to the packing stations will have the potential for the highest volume output. Any instance where we're not meeting that, that's something where we could see an impact to ROI, but something that where we can always leverage something like Locus Hub, where we're going to have a lot of data that's really going to help you identify day to day, how did my labor force interact with my automation solution that day? We highly recommend introducing kiosks throughout these mezzanines. It's going to be a large space with this vertical north to south, and having these kiosks throughout it, it's really going to help your labor force and your operational leads understand where they are that day, how efficient they are, of course, leading and to that measurement of ROI.
As we look to the future, what trends do you foresee in the design and optimization of warehouses, be it mezzanines or otherwise?
Of course, the number one trend that we're always trying to see in design for is peak. We have a traditional peak, of course, around the Black Friday, Cyber Monday. But as we're designing more and more warehouses, we're seeing non-traditional peaks pop up as well. So it's designing not only for that traditional peak that we're all used to and comfortable with, but there's going to be traditional peaks throughout the entire year. And how do we design for that seasonality throughout the entire year? Of course, we also want to design for those high volume SKUs, like we've been saying this whole time. Wider aisles within those mezzanines is something we want to be mindful of, not just in a typical warehouse environment.
Another thing we want to always consider is the reverse logistics piece of the supply chain, right? So your returns. How do you get your returns into a facility and back into a location where it's a desired pick space? So considering the design around where the appropriate column elevators are, or areas where a forklift may input a pallet into a second or third floor are key to the slotting strategy as well.
So, as a final question, what advice would you give to warehouse managers who are considering mezzanine automation but are unsure where to start?
I would start with any of your, look within your network around some of the industry professionals that you're friendly with, because you're not the first one thinking about working on a mezzanine. And there is a lot of experience with mezzanines out there. Adam and I have gone through maybe some of the design aspects and the perspective that we bring to it. But definitely start reaching out to folks in your network to partner with them so that they can maybe provide you with some guidance on your unique scenario.
I just want to emphasize that this consideration it's a big step in the right direction for any warehouse manager. The warehousing industry is a continuously improving industry with automation opportunities. Mezzanines are no exception to that.
Before we wrap up, I've got an exciting invite for you. If you're serious about keeping your automated warehouse secure, mark your calendar for November 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern. We're hosting a webinar titled Secure Your Automated Warehouse by Mastering Threat Modeling. Join Fuad Khalil, Senior Director of Enterprise Security, Risk and Compliance, as he discusses how to identify, understand, and neutralize the risks that automation can bring. Learn to build a strong security posture and get ahead of potential threats. Trust me, this is one you won't want to miss. Sign up now and secure your future-ready operation by going to locusrobotics.com and clicking on events. And thanks again to Erik and Adam for joining me today. And thanks as always to our listeners. We're here to help you move what matters in your warehouse.